over millions of years to store carbs. You very rarely urinate carbs out of your body. We have a filtration system that saves them because the carbohydrates are immediately converted into fat if you have excess. Any excess carb is going to be stored in adipocytes for the most part, insulin driven. And if you're eating a lot of carbs, you're going to definitely, and poorly nutritious carbs, you're going to store fat from that. You don't get fat eating fat. People always make that mistake. They always think, this is high fat. No. Fats are either burned or excreted. It's very hard to store energy as fat unless you have the glycerol backbones, but that requires energy. Where you get your fat, where you put on your weight from is all the carbohydrates. And the best way to get fat is to eat lard with sugar because it's like the icing on the cake. When you have icing, you put butter and sugar, powdered sugar together with the butter. Oh man, your body is going to store that sugar like there's no tomorrow because it realizes all the fat is the energy, and we're not going to pee out sugar unless we have diabetes, so we're going to save all that sugar as fat in the body. So if you got to be careful. All these high fructose corn syrup foods and all that stuff, man, that's like death. You eat that, man, you got diabetes, you got cancer, you got dementia, you got all kinds of stuff from all this.
No mammal is designed to digest a low fat diet. Even a ruminant ends up digesting a high fat diet, but that happens because of the rumen microorganisms that take the fiber and make short chain fatty acids out of it, and then the animal absorbs those volatile fatty acids. And so we don't have a rumen. We don't, have the large intestine or cecum that some primates do, like a gorilla. We also don't eat our own droppings, mostly. Nutritional, physiological tools and adaptations that allow us to use that low-fat diet. We have to consume this high-fat, high protein quality diet.
What exactly is cancer? Is it a genetic disease? Is it just mitochondrial damage? Is it food related or something else?
Yeah. How about you, like me?
Well, I mean, it's the great debate, isn't it? Is it metabolic? Is it genetic? Is it some combination? I tend to come down on the side of it being some combination. There are, last time I checked, I think, correct me if I got this wrong, I think it was something like 11 to 16 genes that have now been identified, so-called oncogenes, that are associated highly with incidences of cancers. That said, we know that the process itself is a dysfunction of the mitochondria. And as such, that ties absolutely irrevocably. It ties in the metabolic health as one consideration. We also know that genes are never complete. A person's set of genes will not determine their outcomes. It will only determine, well, any one gene has one job, and that is to make a protein. One protein, that's its job, its sole job. It's the interaction of all of your genes that determine outcomes, because the genes will react to the environment in which you place them to either up or down regulate the production of any given protein. And it's that basis of the human system, or fails to, I think. So I would always come from a point of view of, let's do what we can to optimize someone's likelihood of metabolic health, precisely because there's not a damn thing we can do about a person's genes. Okay, we can do epigenetics. Yeah, you bet. But given that we can't change what your genes are, let's deal with setting someone's life up in such a way as to be least likely to be a problem. What do you think, Anthony?
No, yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think that, like you said, the underlying root issue is likely just due to dysfunctioning of the mitochondria, but there's certainly genetic factors at play. That there's genes in the mitochondria that the mitochondria code for themselves. There's mitochondrial DNA in the nuclei of your cells, and dysfunctions in these can affect your mitochondria also. A lot of these oncogenes as well do affect the normal functioning of the mitochondria or signaling pathways to the mitochondria. So if you have a damaged cell and your body says, okay, well, your cell says, okay, well, we need to cancel this. We need to go through apoptosis. It sends a signal to the mitochondria, which will action cell death. And if that communication system is damaged, then that signal won't propagate to the mitochondria. They can't destroy the cell. But conversely, if the mitochondria are too damaged, even if they're getting that signal, they can't action the cell death as well. So it's a very interesting interplay and combination. But I definitely agree that there's going to be the underlying issue is that you have very dysfunctional mitochondria or signaling to mitochondria. A very good demonstration of this, well, and some examples, is that there are, if you have a cancer, if you have a tumor, there are tumor cells in there that will have the various genetic changes. And that's what I was taught in medical school, was that you have a series of 8 genetic hallmark changes that once you get to step 8, you have all the pieces in play for metastatic cancer. But when you look at these different cells in a cancer body, a tumor body, only some of them will have those genetic changes. Some of them will have different genetic changes or no genetic changes at all. And there are entire cancer lines that have absolutely no known genetic changes whatsoever. But every known cancer has damaged mitochondria, extremely dysfunctional mitochondria. You look at these things under an electron microscope, they're completely gutted. The internal membrane, the cristae, are just completely absent in a lot of cases. It's called cristalysis. This was theorized by Dr. Otto Warburg in the 20th century. As a Nobel Prize winner. This guy was so bright that he was in Germany as a homosexual Jew during Hitler, and he left him alone because he said, you just keep doing your thing. Everybody else that fit any of those demographics would have been in a concentration camp, but this guy was so prolific in his work that Hitler just said, you just keep doing your thing. We're not going to touch you. And he theorized that this was coming from the mitochondria, and that if you had healthy mitochondria, you could not get cancer. Because the mitochondria are actioning the cell death. If things get too bad, the mitochondria shut it down. But also the mitochondria can stop cell proliferation. So if they feel that it's not appropriate for the cell to divide, the mitochondria will actually physically stop them, chemically stop them. But if they're damaged, then they can't. It's an active process. So if the mitochondria are damaged, then they can't stop the cell division, or they can't action out apoptosis. And so it's very important that you have healthy mitochondria. Experimental demonstration of this happened decades after his work. And he had a seminal paper in the 1950s called The Origins of Cancer, which I recommend everyone to read. And then Professor Seyfried has continued on his work, and others have as well. But there were a set of experiments, the nuclear transfer experiments, where they took the nucleus containing all the cancer-containing genes, supposedly, in these tumor cells, and they took those nuclei, they put them into a healthy cell with healthy cytoplasm and mitochondria, and they did not behave as cancer. They could even clone them, partial clones as well. And then they took the mitochondria, the damaged mitochondria, out of cancer cells, put those into healthy cells with normal DNA, and they did behave as cancer. They couldn't clone them; they just died. And then to put the sort of the nail in the coffin, they took healthy mitochondria and they put them into cancer cells, and it suppressed the cancer. So it's a pretty clear demonstration of Warburg's theory that if you have healthy mitochondria, you really can't get cancer. And so I think that's much more likely to be what it is. Obviously, your genetics will certainly influence the health of your mitochondria and how they function and how they signal. I think there's another argument as to why being in a ketogenic state is a very good idea, because when you're in a ketogenic state, your insulin levels are low. And when your insulin levels are high, it actually blocks apoptosis, or sorry, not autophagy and mitophagy. And so when insulin levels are low enough, then you can actually even if your mitochondria are getting really damaged, you can actually turn them over and recycle them and get more healthy ones. And as long as you have a certain threshold of healthy mitochondria, you really shouldn't be able to get cancer. So yeah, I would agree with that.
So to summarize a little bit, if you your genetics will predisposition you for a certain type of disease if you damage your mitochondria, basically. So it might manifest in a different way, but if you damage your mitochondria, you that cause or that damage will cause the disease itself to manifest afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, I think, Bart.
My bad. Sorry about that. Yes. Don't forget, though, that there are a number of cancers that express without any known oncogenetic input at all.
Okay. And
that's where we're pointing back towards the mitochondria being the kingpin, the linchpin here. So if we look after those, it's very unlikely that we're going to get a problem. And if we do something that is not conducive to the best mitochondrial health, then we might get a different outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and another thing I just want to touch on is, Anthony, I've heard you say before that cancer is diabetes type 5. Is that?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, it's sort of, we call all these things diabetes. They were like Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, PCOS type 4 diabetes. I sort of started trying to make the argument, calling it, cancer type 5 diabetes, just to illustrate that connection with insulin. It's really all it is. It's probably, it may be a looser fit than the other two, but I think it just illustrates that point that if you're in a state of ketosis, then your insulin is going to be low enough. You're actually going to keep recycling and maintaining a healthy supply of mitochondria. And so unless you really, really, really harming yourself and doing other sorts of things that are going to damage your mitochondria in very severe ways, it should be much more difficult to get cancer in the first place. If you are in a ketogenic state and your insulin is low and you're constantly going through mitophagy, which I think is just a normal background housekeeping effect in the body. People will say, well, you have to fast for 5 days every 3 months to try to wipe out some of these cancer cells. We know that you go through autophagy and mitophagy just by being in ketosis, just by having your insulin levels lower. And so I don't think it's because you're just starving yourself and you're just forcing your body into recycling different sorts of things, because you're not just taking them down and breaking them down for parts, you're actually rebuilding them. So it's an energy dependent process. And I think this is just a normal background housekeeping exercise that your body goes through. And so I sort of mentioned that. Yeah.
So when you're talking about this ketogenic state, are you meaning like the post 72 hours ketogenic state with these people that chase ketones and have ketone meters and ask questions like, will this kick me out of ketosis? Those kind of people?
No.
Or do you just mean that, like, if you're eating once a day and that's half an hour, if you take your time over your meal, you're fasting 23 and a half hours. Do you just mean the ketosis that should normally happen every day in between, your meal and your next meal? Okay. Yeah,
just basically referring to lower levels of insulin. Insulin getting down low enough, you can actually go into your normal physiological state that we would call fasting metabolism, which I don't think is a fasting metabolism. I think that's I don't either.
So I think, Anthony, I think what we're really talking about there is the absence of a toxic overburden of sugar.
There's a recent paper actually, Professor Seyfried was part of, came out about the ketogenic diet and the treatments for cancer. Why do you guys think that the carnivore diet is optimal for, or optimal nutrition for chronic disease like cancer? Would anyone like to answer that one?
Who's first?
Let's go Professor Kay.
Right. Okay. I'm an advocate personally of the carnivore diet specifically, as opposed to the ketogenic diet generally, for several reasons with regard to cancer management / whatever you want to call it, in that while there is some potential benefit of the ketones themselves, to me, in terms of the nutritional approach to dealing with metastases, it seems like if we cut off both glucose and glutamine to a large degree, that is a large part of the diet, and that is an effect that is independent of the ketogenesis. The reason I make the distinction is because on a carnivore diet, often people are eating more protein than they would on a ketogenic diet, and as such actually express lower ketones, but the effect that we're looking for is still there.
Yeah.
I'm open to being corrected on any of that, but that's kind of my immediate thoughts.
All right.
May I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
And I agree completely with Bart Kay, and I think we have to ask the question is, what is the cause of cancer? And I think a plant-based, lean meat, low animal fat diet is the major cause. And I think one of the problems with people on carnivore is they're probably eating a high protein diet. And keto, I don't even know what keto is. And that may be part of the problem. It's a metabolic state that may be irrelevant to the food you're eating anyway. But I think that plants are just poisonous for us. And some people might die with anaphylactic shock immediately. Thankfully, we have some treatments for that much of the time. But I think that plants break down to substances and have the toxins that cause the cancers. And so if you're trying to heal a cancer, you have to remove the cause of the cancer as the first thing. And so I think fatty meat and fasting and maybe just straight fat might be the best thing to do, because, you know, inside the adipose tissue is probably everything you need to survive. But I think when we use the term keto, I think it's trying to sort of be nice to the standard medical system, who only will accept keto and won't be open to carnivore at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a battle to get them to accept keto in the first place, let alone carnivore. I mean, now we've just completely left the building, haven't we? Now we're just
that's right.
Yeah.
You know, it's when we're seeing the troubles around the world, the number of people suffering from cancers and all sorts of diseases. And I kind of found this area because I suffered, but some of my friends, a healthy doctor, died of cancer at 52, and he ate a healthy diet. And he was just an amazing man, Dave Kilmer. And the more I listen and learn from all of us, and we see healthcare costs going up, especially America. We're seeing what the venture capitals are doing to healthcare, and they're looking at money rather than helping men and mommies thrive and survive and live. So I mean, I think what Sammy is sharing, and I certainly love listening and watching DC Learning and Bart Kay. I think amazing information for all of us around the globe, and some people who have stepped out of the standard box and are willing to say something that, you know, most of us haven't been willing to listen to. And I'm in standard medicine, and I would say for years I would have barked at this as incorrect. And now I'm really want to be out there to tell all of our brothers and sisters around the globe that carnivore is actually the answer, and fatty meat, maybe even raw meat in some cases, which I don't know what Dr. Kay has to say about that, but I'd love to learn more. But cancer, like diabetes and strokes and all that stuff, is really simply caused by a standard healthy lifestyle that us doctors in the medical community recommend, and we need to break it up. And what all of you are doing is really commendable, because you're risking being cut off from social media and people, blocking you, which I think we need to stand up and just put it out there. And today's social media has more knowledgeable information than standard medicine all day long.